Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man could have changed everything in the Marvel Universe. Back in 2012, there were real talks about bringing his Spider-Man into the Avengers world. Oscorp almost appeared next to Stark Tower, hinting that Garfield's Peter Parker lived in the same New York as Iron Man and Captain America. If that deal had gone through, the MCU we know today would look completely different. His friendship with Steve Rogers, his rivalry and bond with Tony Stark, even the battles of Civil War and Infinity War would carry new meaning. This is the untold story of how Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man could have transformed the entire MCU forever. The Oscorp Tower that almost was. In 2012, two of the biggest superhero movies ever made were about to hit theaters. On one side, Marvel Studios was assembling its heroes for the Avengers. On the other, Sony was rebooting Spider-Man with The Amazing Spider-Man starring Andrew Garfield. What most fans don't know is that there was almost a secret plan to connect the two worlds. Behind closed doors, Marvel and Sony actually discussed placing the Oscorp Tower from The Amazing Spider-Man into the New York skyline of the Avengers. It would have been small, just another skyscraper among the city lights, but it would have meant everything. That one building would have quietly confirmed that Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man existed in the same world as Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. A lot of newer fans won't actually realize this, but the Amazing Spider-Man movies actually were almost a part of the MCU even before all of this deal between Marvel and Disney and Sony came about. The Amazing Spider-Man featured Oscorp Industries, which played a massive part in the film, and the Avengers movie, which also came out in 2012, featured New York City as well.
There was an idea to bring together a group of remarkable...
The technical deadline that changed everything. Concept artists at Sony reportedly sent Marvel the 3D model of Oscorp Tower. Everyone loved it. The only problem was timing. The Avengers had already finished most of its digital effects work, and Marvel's VFX team didn't have enough time to re-render the city skyline. The crossover was right there, within reach, but slipped away because of a technical deadline. An interesting fact that not many people might know is the Oscorp Tower actually almost featured in the backdrop of the Avengers film, which meant that the Amazing Spider-Man movies canonically would have already been a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. However, this ended up falling through, and Oscorp Tower never ended up being in the back of the Avengers movie. If that tower had made it into the movie, the MCU might look completely different today. Garfield's Spider-Man could have been swinging through Manhattan while the Chitauri invaded. Maybe Tony Stark would have been the one tracking him down later, seeing this mysterious masked kid saving people on the same streets. The 2015 deal and Andrew's revelation. We move 2 years forward after the unsuccessful TASM 2. Sony and Marvel reached an agreement in 2015 to put Spider-Man in the MCU. People assumed at first this would be Andrew Garfield's version of the character, and all the rumors were that he would be making his appearance in Captain America: Civil War. Then it turned out a few years down the line that Andrew Garfield had never actually ever been offered the role of Spider-Man in the MCU. Andrew Garfield even went on to say, "No, I've never been offered the part of MCU Spider-Man." To be honest, all the ins and outs of what happened is a more tender conversation that maybe I don't want to talk about in public in a press situation, which is kind of weird because all the rumors and speculation at the time, if you seem to remember, was that Andrew Garfield was going to be a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but it turns out this was never the case. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Steve Rogers, the alternate path. After the Oscorp Tower nearly united two cinematic worlds, things would have taken a completely new turn for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. In this alternate timeline, Peter Parker wouldn't have been scouted by Tony Stark at all. Instead, his first connection to the MCU would come through S.H.I.E.L.D. and more importantly, through Steve Rogers. At this point in his life, Peter is a very different kind of hero. He's still haunted by Gwen Stacy's death, still carrying the guilt that he couldn't save her. Every night, he swings through the city trying to make it right, but the spark that once drove him is dimming. So when S.H.I.E.L.D. begins investigating strange energy readings and advanced tech tied to Oscorp, they stumble upon a young man who's already doing their job, protecting people, stopping crime, and expecting nothing in return. Steve Rogers sees that. He's been in Peter's shoes before, a hero trying to do the right thing in a world that doesn't always reward it. Why the timeline wouldn't work? Let's look at it more from an objective standpoint. Would the story have worked connecting the end of TASM 2 to Captain America Civil War? And the thing is, you'll be very saddened to know it probably wouldn't have. During the time between the first Avengers movie, which was 2012, and of course 2014 when The Amazing Spider-Man 2 took place, the Avengers were based in New York, so trying to integrate the lizard poisoning the entire city and everything that happened with Max Dillon, aka Electro, into the Marvel Cinematic Universe would have been pretty impossible because these were citywide events. These would have been things that would have caught the attention of the Avengers, especially if the lizard, for example, was trying to turn everyone in New York into a giant lizard. Likewise, you could ask the question, where was Spider-Man during the events of Avengers 2012? Surely if there was an alien invasion, Spider-Man would be first on the scene. Civil War complications. By the time the Sokovia Accords divide the Avengers, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man has already seen what loss and responsibility can do to a person. He's older now, more experienced, and carries the weight of Gwen Stacy's death like a scar that never fades. When you really think about it, Spider-Man's story in Captain America Civil War only works because he's a young, naive, and impressionable version of Spider-Man. We've got to remember Spider-Man only had his powers for 6 months in Civil War, and Tom Holland's version of Peter Parker is really young and impressionable, and that's why Tony Stark was basically able to coerce him into coming to Berlin. However, I don't think Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man would have been this easy to crack. Plus, I think Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man would have actually been on Captain America's side during the whole ideal in Civil War. We have to remember that one of the reasons why Gwen actually died in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was because Harry Osborn knew Peter Parker's identity, and that's why he then took Gwen Stacy to the clock tower. Technological independence, building his own suit. After the events of Civil War, Peter Parker is no longer the same hero who started out swinging through New York with wide-eyed hope. The battle between heroes changed him. When Tony Stark's advanced suit failed during the fight, it wasn't just a malfunction, it was a wake-up call. Peter realized that relying on someone else's technology meant giving up part of what made him Spider-Man in the first place. From the very beginning, Garfield's Spider-Man was a creator. His first Amazing Spider-Man suit and web shooters were built by his own hands. They weren't flashy, but they worked because they came from his mind. So when Tony offered him a high-tech upgrade before Civil War, it felt like recognition. For a moment, Peter thought he had found a mentor who truly believed in him, but when the suit failed mid-battle, the message became painfully clear. After the battle, Peter doesn't go back to Tony for repairs. Instead, he returns to his small apartment surrounded by Oscorp blueprints, old photos of Gwen, and scraps of damaged tech. Slowly, he designs his own new suit, one that carries both his intellect and his emotion. Gwen Stacy's lasting impact. Gwen Stacy's death remains one of the most defining moments in Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man story. It's the moment that breaks him and shapes everything that comes after. In this alternate MCU timeline, that tragedy doesn't fade into the background. It becomes the emotional heartbeat of Peter Parker's journey. After the events of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Peter carries an unbearable weight of guilt. Every rescue, every mission, every late-night patrol is his way of making up for the one person he couldn't save. Gwen isn't just a memory of lost love, she's his compass. The voice in his mind reminding him why he does what he does. With the overhang of Gwen's death, it would have been pretty impossible to incorporate a cohesive story for Andrew's version of the character without overstepping his role in Civil War or overshadowing Cap, Bucky, and Iron Man. We've got to remember Captain America. Civil War is a story about Captain America, Bucky Barnes, and Tony Stark. This story would not have been about Spider-Man. The Sinister Six and Clone Saga. During the Garfield era, there were hints of a Sinister Six movie and a Clone Saga. In this alternate MCU timeline, those ideas could have finally come to life. After the events of Civil War, Peter has begun finding his place in a world filled with gods, soldiers, and geniuses. But even as he adjusts, something darker brews behind the scenes. Oscorp's old research, long abandoned after Norman Osborn's downfall, is revived by a scientist named Miles Warren. He becomes obsessed with cloning and genetic perfection, and his experiments romance take a personal turn when he uses Gwen Stacy's DNA. Meanwhile, Oscorp's old files begin leaking into the hands of criminals and mercenaries, giving rise to a terrifying alliance. The Sinister Six, Doc Ock returns, brilliant yet broken. Vulture seeks revenge after losing his tech empire. Mysterio manipulates reality itself to make the world doubt Spider-Man. Kraven the Hunter arrives in New York determined to take down the most dangerous prey. Rhino and Scorpion complete the circle, each carrying their own grudges against Spider-Man. Infinity War, a different weight. If Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man had been part of the MCU, the events of Infinity War would have carried a completely different weight. By this point, Peter has already lived through unimaginable pain. He lost Gwen, battled the Sinister Six, and learned that even heroes can't save everyone. So when he joins the Avengers to face Thanos, he isn't the excited new recruit we remember. He's quieter, more focused, and haunted by everything he's already lost. Tony Stark immediately senses it. Their bond isn't just mentor and student anymore. It's two men who understand what it means to carry guilt and keep fighting anyway. That's why when the snap happens, the moment hits harder than ever. As Peter begins to disintegrate, there's no panic in his eyes, just heartbreak. He tells Tony he's sorry, not because he's scared, but because he feels like he's failing someone again. The right decision. I think story-wise, they made the right decision because it would have complicated things. It would have made things unfathomable, and I think it would have just confused the audience. But recasting and bringing Tom Holland in and starting from scratch definitely was the best decision story-wise. Obviously, some people are gonna say they would have liked Andrew's Spider-Man in the film regardless and in the universe, but I just don't think that's feasible. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man always felt like the hero who never got to finish his story. When The Amazing Spider-Man 3 was canceled, fans were left hanging. There was no real closure, just an open wound in the Spider-Verse. Years later, when Garfield returned in No Way Home, it wasn't just a fun surprise, it was emotional. It reminded everyone how much they loved his version and how much heart he brought to the role.